Welcome, chess friends. A few weeks ago, I was on the Perpetual Chess podcast, and I spoke about my use of Claude AI and Gemini for the creation of chess tools. In this video, I want to show you some new use cases and also show you, for people who are reluctant to start, how it actually works in Claude, how you communicate with Claude, and how easy it actually is if you have a vision on what you want to achieve. So the simplest use case that I started with, and I just want to go back to that for one moment, was related to this puzzle database, right? So Lichess has 5.9 million chess puzzles, and they are in standard CSV, in like a text format. So puzzle ID, fan, moves, rating, etc. But I wanted to have a system where you can search based on a position. That would work like this, right? So if I go to ChessBase, you can see here a position, right, from the Evans Gambit. And I would like to know which puzzles are in the Lichess puzzle database that had these moves as the starting moves in the game. But of course, in the puzzle database, there's only a fan, they're not games. So I created a Claude program that I shared on Lichess to include those games up to the moment and make them available then for myself in ChessBase. So now I can do a reference search, and I get all the puzzles you can see here, right? It's about 1,200 puzzles that start from this position, right? And then if I go into any puzzle, right, there's information here like this was played between two strong players, and this was actually the move that facilitated the combination for white. So that's the first move from the Lichess puzzle, you could say, and then it's black, then it's white to play and win. And this is for me very useful to find tactical patterns for my Chessable courses, and to find tactics that are very characteristic in certain openings. This was the first application, and I always refine my applications, right? So Lichess every month updates their puzzle database. This initial run to get 1.2 million opening puzzles out of the 5.8 in total took about 12 hours, and I didn't want to every time run a program for 12 hours. So I have a puzzle updater, and every month I have to just run it for a few minutes, and I get the latest puzzles in PGN form added. And I have a complete database that is being kept up to date. So this is a very easy example. Then, of course, I'm a Chessable author, and one of the things that I thought was missing in Chessable is that when you play online, right, you don't get any feedback, and you cannot have spaced repetition based on the mistakes that you make online versus your repertoire on Lichess. So I created a website for the users of my courses. You can select the course, right? You can see here the different courses. So all the courses are here, and then you can input two Lichess usernames, right? Your main account and your alt account, your chess.com main account and alt account, and a start date, right? So if I select my own name, and I do that for just for Lichess, and I go back 6 months, right? I can now generate a practice file, and this practice file I can upload to Chessable for spaced repetition. And it's in a format, right, where the key move is automatically correct. So you can see 29 games analyzed, 10 deviations found, and right, you can see the practice positions. I can download the PGN, and you can see that it includes the date. So then I also know when I run this file. And then I can go to Chessable, right? And you can see here, I have here this course created, online games, right? And I can determine how I want to study them, if I want to study them as a puzzle. Or I can, right, if I want to do it in a different way, you can see here, I can go, for instance, to the Sveshnikov, right? And I have two to review. And I can go in, and you can see, right, I have to now find the right move to play. It's knight c6, if I remember correctly. Yes, knight c6, and then castle. And then you can see that there's a link to the course variation, and I can see what I played before. So instead of knight c6, 2 times I played castle immediately instead of knight c6. And you can see there's also an evaluation of Stockfish 18 at the highest depth. Of course, in this interview with Ben Johnson, I also spoke about a repertoire generator. I'm working on this new course. So let me close this. And let me show you. And so let me close this, because this was our puzzle search, right? And let me go to some other things that I've been doing. So, of course, you can create a new repertoire, but what you can also do is audit the current repertoires, right? So you can see here I created an audit repertoire for my Scotch Gambit course, which was created in 2018. And this is how it looks, right? So you can see here, basically the output of this is completely automated. And I have now included probabilities, right? So you can see here, knight f6 is played in 28% of the games, right? Then after d4, e takes d4 is 68% of the games. So now you could say the product of the two probabilities, right? 68 times 28 is 19. And so I have, you can see, a cutoff, and this resembles you could say, the coverage that they have on Chessbook. And in this case, right, for the audit of this opening, I looked at the coverage of 90% of the Lichess games, 1600 to 2500 rapid and classical, and for it to be statistically significant, at least 100 games. And I started here with 1% cutoff, right? So just that's a bit rough, but you can see that if I go all the way down, right, how it works. You can see here I have here several variations where the probability is 0.2%. So as the input file, I give my current repertoire, and it calculates the probabilities that these variations occur based on the product of the black moves, the probability of the black moves. So I have to consider whether they are too deep or not. And then you can also see, right, that I have here a move like after f6. So this is the top variation. In my course, it's knight b3, and it continues right with this line that was from a game of David Smerden. And this, of course, is all about, has to do with the thematic control over the c5 square. But hierarchs, which is based on correspondence and engine games and top GM games, recommends here to play rook e1. So for me, this is then an indication that I have to evaluate whether I want to play knight b3 and continue with this variation in my course, or that I have to go to rook e1, and you can see it has an exclamation mark in the openings book of hierarchs, and I can see here the evaluation of Stockfish 18 at level 30. It can also, of course, be the case that I have variations where that I'm kind of missing, right? Because I thought that they were not so relevant. And just to show you, they are indicated in this file with new, right? So if you, for instance, if you see here, right, bishop c5, okay. Of course, this is a completely different opening. That's why it's not covered. So I can skip that. But let's go to another variation where it says new. Let me have a look. So here everything is properly covered. Yes, so here, right, there's knight e5. So this is occurs in 34% of the games, and I included this as a tactic, right? So this is in the course, but not in the variations. So, but in this case, right, you could say, oh, the probability that this occurs actually is pretty high, 1.2%. There's no trainable variation. Should this be a trainable variation? So this is my audit file, and I can, of course, completely control that based on parameters. I start with the highest threshold, like 1%, and then in the end I go to, let's say, 1 in 500, and then it gets much more refined. But this is how I start, just to get an indications of which variations I have to look at. Right, and I do this, of course, I do this also by looking at in Lichess itself. So my basis is always 1600 to 2500 rapid and classical, and I confront the moves that club players play with the master database, the hierarchs, Stockfish 18, and the Chessbase correspondence and mega database. So that's the concept, right? But I have now automated it. So for the repertoire generator, it generates a complete new tree. In this case, I input as the file the repertoire PGN, and then it compares basically where I go too deep and where I have been too shallow. And so what is the result, right? I've been using this. So we looked at this one. This was the online games, right? So let me go back to Chessable, and you can see what I did. I completely revamped my Evans Gambit beginner's guide based on these tools. So I call this right, the 2026 new edition. And so what is new and what we covered so far is the balanced coverage for club players, right? So variations are selected and prioritized based on what you actually face. And this was completely based on this audit file, right? So there's like 50 new, but I also let go of 7 variations that were unlikely to occur in the games of club players where I was too deep. So it's really to get to a more focused practical repertoire. Then the second thing I did is I looked at the repertoire, and I looked at basically, you could say, right, where did players go wrong from the white side on Lichess, right? Because on the black side, we always use that already in selecting the moves. But this is, right, if you think about it, this is to think like, if you are a white player, which moves is it that the white player most often chooses the wrong move versus the repertoire move, and what is the difference in Stockfish evaluation? So you can see here the difference is 1 pawn, right, 1.1, and they are sorted by frequency, right? So if I just, let's say, open up one, right, so let's say this one, right, if I open it up, you can see, so this is the position, and in 39% of the cases, white plays knight takes e5, right? Because it's, of course, very exciting. You think that I will have an attack on f7, and this pawn is hanging. But black has this typical queen g5 counterattack, right? And suddenly the tables are turning, because actually, right, you cannot even, it can even go worse if you play knight takes f7, queen takes g2, rook f1, queen takes e4, bishop e2, knight f3, checkmate. So this is kind of a trick that white has, right, based on knight d4. And a lot of white players, they play here knight takes e5. So I have included this as a critical move, because this is a common mistake on Lichess. So that's the first type of critical moves I included. Then there is, of course, the whole other thing. As an author, right, if you go to the advanced control panel, you have here problem moves, also called difficult moves, right? And so if I go to this chapter and I sort on mistakes, you can see, right, there's 25,000 attempts and over 6,300 mistakes. And I was thinking, like, we're not doing anything with this as authors, and I thought it would be good as a different training angle for my students to have these as puzzles, as kind of tactics puzzles. So I asked Claude, right, I said, these are difficult moves, and now I want to show you, right, how it works. So I said here, I showed here the two pages, and I said, can you create a task to put the 10 most common mistakes per chapter based on absolute number of mistakes? Target is a PGN with the right move, and then the 3 most common played wrong moves that you get by pressing the link of the mistake line. You can put these moves in the study that is open. So I created a study on Lichess because I thought that would be helpful for Claude. Every mistake should be one game. You can also use a different tool for capturing the moves to the PGN. So I said you don't have to use Lichess. So then it says, okay, right, basically it tries to do it in this environment, but this is a real Python environment. And I was not happy, right? And I said, here, can you create a task? And so a task is like an agent who performs a task for you, right? And I wanted them to scrape all these lines. And you can see if I go back, right? What is the problem if I do it myself, right? I cannot see here what the wrong move is, right? So I can see here, okay, this is the variation. I go in, then I get the 3 moves, right? I say, okay, now I know it, right? And then you would say, you know, you just click backspace and you're back on the previous page, right? But if you press the backspace, the problem is, for if you are just if you do it yourself, you get back to the control panel, right? You don't get back to the problem moves, and then you have to select again the right chapter. So it's very tedious, right? And then you have to sort it again on mistakes. And now, right, you can go to the second one. So I thought that was very tedious, and I just was thinking, like, can I automate that with Claude? So in the end, right, we discussed, and I said, basically, I was not happy with the approach that they wanted to take. So I said 90% of the work remains manual, tedious work. I will try it a different way. And I said then, I want an agent doing this work based on clear instructions. The agent would take over my browser and do the task. And then it started doing it. And then basically, I asked Claude, can you create instructions so it does this task correctly? So Claude made instructions for Claude in Chrome where I can do the tasks, right? And then it was just scraping completely and this, and I didn't have to do anything myself. And right, and that's basically how I created these. And now, if you of course look at go back to the course, the beginner's guide, right, and I look at these 100 most common mistakes and how they look. So let me just take okay, this is so this is how it looks now, right? So you can see this is the position, and you can see accuracy is 78%, right? Or 2,500 mistakes in 12,000 tries. So knight g5 is the move to be played, and then most people play castle and queen h5 and the game is over. But you can see that 1,600 times, right, instead of knight g5, d5 was played. So you can now do these as a puzzle. So it's like you don't see them, you could say, in the variation with support of the complete line, but you have to identify, like, okay, there's this position, what do I play? And that's how you go about it, right? Yes, and then, but then after you've done the puzzle, right? So let me go back. We were here, right? If I say review, you can see it's like attack the pawn on f7. And you see how many mistakes there were. Okay, we know not to play d5, but knight g5. So I play knight g5, castle, queen h5. And now you get all the statistics and you can go to the next variation. So I thought that, right, between the Lichess difficult moves, the critical moves there, where the deviations are being done in practice by players who are playing this repertoire, and then the difficult moves that every author has available for themselves, that would be very useful for people. So you can see I have the puzzle database, I have this website where you can see where you deviate in your online games. Okay, here we are. So you can say you did this, of course, for your eight courses. But of course, once you have this framework, I also created a program where I just input the PGN. Right, so I give a PGN of games, and I give a PGN of a repertoire, and it generates deviations. Or I say fetch the games from Lichess and chess.com and compare it to this repertoire. And it can be just a private repertoire. So you can see that you can just extend programs, right? So you can see that I extended the repertoire generator to become an audit program. I extended the puzzle database program so it can be incremental. I extended this program so I can use it in different ways, just with, let's say, over-the-board games in a PGN or with a private repertoire, and then compare it like this. Yes, and just also to show you, right, so if I go back to Chessable, just one more. So you can see I have here chess steps exercises, and also just to show you, right, how this works. So you see here, this is a step 4 mix, right? From this is a sample from stappenmethode.nl. And this is the Chess Vision ebook reader. And they just get all analyzed. And the only thing you have to do, right, is if you click a certain puzzle, is that you have to indicate who is the move, right? So the standard is white, so it doesn't, of course, read the black dot. So you have to indicate who's the move, but then you're done, right? And then you can copy the Venn and you have diagrams. But of course, when I was creating my PGNs, I also wanted to have the answers in the PGNs, right? So when you look at these answers, right, they are like this. And you can do, of course, in ChessBase, right? You can start inputting all of this. So, but I just asked Claude, can you put in the PGN these answers? And of course, you see these are figurines, right? So it's not letters. So it was reading the figurines, and then underneath the figurines are letters, but they are Dutch, right? So it's the D for dame instead of the Q for the queen, and the T for toren instead of rook. So it converted that to the English notation, and I got PGN back in this case, right, with 12 puzzles with the answers included. And so I didn't have to do the tedious work to put it in myself. And again, that was something that I asked Claude to do. So many new use cases. I hope to hear from you what kind of use cases you have. And yes, I also wanted to show you one thing, of course. When you think about Claude, I have, I have this subscription of $20 a month. And you can see here all my projects, right? So I have project backups. So these are all the programs that I created so far. So for finding the critical moves, for the critical moves of Chessable, right? So this is for the Lichess, and you can see here evaluation of a repertoire, right? So you can see, and what I have been doing, and that's not natural for Claude to do, is making documentation, having versions, and making sure that everything is backed up, right? So I now have, you can see it's like 2.0, 1.0, 1.4, 4.2. So I can see where we are, how far something has evolved. And I ask Claude also every time to update the documentation, right? So how does this documentation look? Right, you can see here repertoire practice file pipeline created in a single chat session, and then it says basically what it does: a two-step interactive pipeline that downloads your Lichess games filtered by opening data and time control, then compares them against the PGN repertoire file and produces a practice file containing only the positions where you deviated from theory, right? So then you can see basically what the prompts are, what the output is, and how all the programs work. And that's how I basically keep an overview, because for myself, right, after I've created 14 programs, sometimes I don't know exactly what the syntax was, which program was exactly doing what. So for me, it's also very useful to have this on hand for myself. So this was my update. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you subscribe, and see you again. Bye, everyone.